In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, welcome to another session of Finding God. We are finishing chapter 53 in Revelation and chapter 12 in arrangement. Joseph, the story of Joseph. And I refer to the older text, which is the Old Testament, because the chapter of Genesis, which is the first chapter of the Old Testament and of the Bible, ends with the story of Joseph. You start with chapter 37, and then it goes from chapter 39 till chapter 50. And then after chapter 50, the book of Exodus starts, which is the story of Moses leaving for Egypt. So, what's going on? So that's one of the reasons I'm mentioning the Bible and I'm holding it with me, because after I cover the story here, I'll take a brief dive into the final few verses of Genesis, because it's the story of Joseph. Because in the Bible, it is mentioned in incredible detail. And if someone wants to supplement their reading of Surah Yusuf or the chapter of Joseph in the Quran, perhaps you can consider the Old Testament as well. Now, I'm not an advocate, obviously, of jumping back and forth. Habiba Ghulam says hi. I will respond to your message in a bit, Habiba Ghulam, but thanks for saying hi. So I'm not a big advocate of reading only one book, but I am certainly an advocate of practicing one religion completely. You can certainly go to a church or to a temple or a synagogue, but you know what you believe. You can visit, but know that whatever you believe is what you believe in. Make sure that that belief is maintained and sacred, and let not any other uh, belief or perspective sway you or guide you in another direction. That's where I stand. Particularly, I don't, but I always encourage visiting and engaging. That's why I read the Bhagavad Gita, and I read the Old and New Testaments, and I read the Quran because it's my book. Um, so if anybody is interested in reading the story of Joseph in Abrahamic narratives, after you've done with reading the Quran, which is one chapter, you can go to the Bible and read chapter 39 till chapter 50 of the book of Genesis. And that's a nice, detailed version of the story as well. Now, today we're finishing this chapter. So I reached till chapter 67, where Jacob is speaking to his sons, and there's a huge footnote at the end which I covered with the book, and now we're going to finish today. So I'm just going to recount from what I read last week, and then I'll finish today. And I'm going to touch upon just a few verses of the Old Testament. So, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, it says, let me just check if I can see it correctly. Everything seems okay. Yeah. So it says, and he said, "O my sons, do not enter by one gate, but enter by different gates, and I cannot avail you against God at all. Verily, the decision rests only with God. In him I put my trust, and let all those that trust put their trust in him." So we're here. And now we continue. So try to remember, if you haven't seen the last video, please do, but try to remember. Now Joseph has been in prison, he's been molested, he's been abandoned by his brothers, he's bearing the burden of interpreting dreams and understanding the meaning of dreams, and now he's becoming closer to the Pharaoh. So the father has told the sons to visit him. And when they entered according to their father's advice, it did not avail them in the least against the will of God. It was but a need of Jacob's inner self, which he discharged. And verily he was endowed with knowledge, because we had taught him, but most men know not. So that was, maybe it's a strategic play in terms of optics. Don't enter together, enter separately. And when they went in before Joseph, he took his brother Benjamin to himself and said, "Verily I am your brother. So grieve not for what they used to do." Interesting. Maybe he took him aside. So when he had furnished them forth with their provisions, he put the golden bowl in his brother's bag. A golden bowl. Oh, that's a nice strategy. If you want him to come back, you put something on his person or in his bag, and then you can send your police to say, "Hey, they stole something," and bring them back. Something along those lines. Then a crier cried. Oh, that's a nice way of saying it. Then a crier cried, "Oh, you in the caravan, surely you are thieves." all part of Joseph's plan. They, turning towards them, said, "What is it that you have lost?" They said, "We have lost the golden bowl of the king, and for him who produces it is the reward of a camel load, and I will be bound by it." They said, "By God, indeed you know that we came not to make mischief in the land, and we are no thieves." They, Joseph's men, said, "What then shall be the penalty of him if you are proved to be liars?" Nice. It's a nice back and forth. We see that even with the police today. "Oh, you stole something?" "Well, no, I didn't." "Well, what happens if we find something on you?" So it's the same conversation. And the brothers said, his penalty should be that he, in whose bag it is found, should be held for the punishment of the crime. Thus we punish the wrongdoers, the Zalimun. So Joseph, began the search in the bags before the bag of his brother. Then he brought in out of his brother's bag. Thus did we plan for Joseph. This is God's plan, and Joseph is only the executor. He could not take his brother by the law of the king as a slave, except that God willed it. So God made the brothers to bind themselves with their way of punishment, enslaving of a thief. We raise to degrees whom we will, but over all those endowed with knowledge is the all-knowing God. That's interesting. I love how God said that. I'm going to read this again. We raise to degrees whom we will, which means we elevate who we choose to, but over all those endowed with knowledge is the all-knowing. So what it means is, if I am God, I can take this pen and I can elevate this pen to whatever level I choose to elevate, but I'm still on top. I'm still above all of them. So I'm sure none of us had any doubt about that. And then the brother said, "If he steals, there was a brother of his, Joseph, who did steal before him." Wow. That's so direct. There's no foreshadowing. Like in today's movies, you have a bit of a foreshadowing and, oh, what are they thinking? It's so direct. But also this is a summary, and the Bible is a different summary. The brother said, "If he steals, there was a brother of his, Joseph, who did steal before him. But these things did Joseph keep in himself, revealing not the secrets to them." So imagine you're the king, or you're the king's aide, so you're or the minister, a very high position, and you're confronted by your brothers, and while you catch them, they say, "Well, you know, this boy also had a brother who stole," and you standing there knowing, well, I didn't steal. You abandoned me. You abandoned me, and I was left to rot in prison, and I was molested, and now I'm here. You abandoned me. It's that mindset. But Joseph kept his calm, because I think the Almighty Lord commanded him not to reveal. He said within himself, "You are in worst case, and God is the best knower of that which you describe." Exactly. So he knows the truth, and he knows that they know the truth, but they have to present themselves in a certain manner. So he didn't correct them. We see that even today. We're confronted with hundreds of people who might be giving wrongful descriptions of events, but we stay quiet and say, "I don't need to get into this with you. My Lord will handle all of it. I don't need to take care of this." They said, "O ruler of the land, verily he has an old father who will grieve for him. So take one of us in his place. Indeed, we think you are one of the Muhsinun, the good doers." Wow. So such flattery. "Of course, please take one of us." And he said, "God forbid that we should take anyone but him, with whom we found our property. Indeed, if we did so, we should be Zalimun, wrongdoers." I love the term Muhsinun and Zalimun. It's a balance, isn't it? It's a lovely way of balancing out the two practices. But Joseph is right. The thief must be punished. You can't offer yourself in his place just because your dad is old. You can't do that. So I think that's a fair point that Joseph made, and he knew that he made that point, knowing that that's how he'll get to keep his brother with him. So when they despaired of him, they had a conference in private. The eldest amongst them said, "Know you not that your father did take an oath from you in God's name, and before this you did fail in your duty with Joseph? Therefore I will not leave this land until my father permits me, or God decides my case by releasing Benjamin, and he is the best of judges." It's so funny how the eldest suddenly has developed this wonderful conscience. Now, in the Bible, like in the Quran, it's just the 11 brothers and Joseph. In the Bible, there's a lot more discussion about their names, who they were, what kind of personalities they had. Maybe not all 11, but their names have been discussed in more detail. And so the eldest stays with the youngest brother, Benjamin, and says, "Return to your father and say, 'O our father, verily your son Benjamin has stolen, and we testify not except according to what we know, and we could not know the unseen. And ask the people of the town where we have been, and the caravan in which we returned, and indeed we are telling the truth.'" So this is the brother's way of saying to the father, like, look, we lost Joseph last time, but not this time. So you can ask the people of the town and the caravan, we're telling the truth, and he stole something, because they have to prove to the father that Benjamin did not suffer the same fate as Joseph. And I wonder why Benjamin didn't suffer the same fate as Joseph, because he was also the youngest. He also turned out to be a prophet. He was also the son from the second wife of Jacob. So I wonder why he didn't suffer. Or maybe after the event with Joseph, the brothers were a bit more careful, that they tried to protect Benjamin more. I wonder why he wasn't also left. Or maybe there was a deeper story here, and we haven't touched upon it. And Jacob said, "Nay, but your own selves have beguiled you into something, so patience is most fitting for me. Maybe God will bring them back all to me. Truly he, only he, is the all-knowing, all-wise." There's a great responsibility with being a prophet, and there's also great power. And this is the power. He knows that he has to be patient, because he knows how all of it will work out. He knows it. But that requires him to be patient and to be mindful. It's very interesting. And he turned away from them and said, "Alas, my grief for Joseph." And he lost his sight because of the sorrow that he was suppressing. My Lord. Yes. Imagine mourning your son so much that you lose sight. Not lose sight of, but you lose your sight. You can't see anymore. Imagine that. Jacob is very important, because another word for Jacob is Israel. The children of Israel are the children of Jacob. So when we talk about Israel, we talk about Jacob. He's that level of a figure, because Abraham is supposed to be Abrahamic religions, because of his son Isaac and Ishmael came all three Abrahamic religions: Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. But Jacob is for the people of Israel. So he's the son of Israel, is a son of Jacob. They said, "By God, you will never cease remembering Joseph until you become weak with old age, or until you be of the dead." Well, that's true. It's your fault. You lost him. You abandoned him. He said, "I only complain of my grief and sorrow to God. Know from God that which you know not. O my sons, go you and inquire about Joseph and his brother, and never give up hope of God's mercy. Certainly no one despairs of God's mercy, except the people who disbelieve." Ain't that the truth? And then they went back to the palace. Then when they entered unto him, Joseph, they said, "O ruler of the land, a hard time has hit us in our family. We have brought but poor capital. So pay us full measure and be charitable to us. Truly God does reward the charitable." So now they know that their brother stole, so they couldn't take all the money and bounty that they were owed, so now they're back. He said, "Do you know what you did with Joseph and his brother when you were ignorant?" Wow, interesting. See, so in the Quran, it's a summary of a summary. It's a story. So the verses are jumping quickly. And in the Quran, the way it's told is told in the way of a lyrical, poetic story. But if you read it in translation as prose, it wouldn't really make sense. Because in poetry, you can jump back and forth very easily. But in prose, you have to build. So it makes sense. When they came up to him, he said, "Do you know what you did with Joseph and his brother when you were ignorant?" And they said, "Are you indeed Joseph?" And he said, "I am Joseph, and this is my brother Benjamin. God has indeed been gracious to us. Verily, he who fears God with obedience to him, by abstaining from sins and evil deeds, by performing righteous and good deeds, and is patient, then surely God makes not the reward of the Muhsinun to be lost. So it's the closest thing we see today. And that's not an apt comparison, but it's only in the media, is Tony Stark saying that I am Iron Man. It's just the direct. But nobody had asked him. Nobody had said, the reporters were actually saying, why are you saying that? We didn't ask you. That's the closest thing one can think of. But imagine the upheaval that created. I imagine when he said, I am Joseph and this is my brother Benjamin, it would have been a huge shock to the brothers, and there would have been a lot more that has happened in that period of time. Because he said, do you know what you did with Joseph and his brother when you were ignorant? So he's touched upon a matter which they didn't expect. So 11 people have gone back, or 10 people have gone back. And they're speaking to the king or the ruler of the land, and he says, well, do you know what you did? And they're like, how does he know? How do you know? Are you indeed Joseph? It must have developed like that, but in the Quran it's a summary, so they have to explain it this way. They said, by God, indeed God has preferred you above us, and we certainly have been sinners. He said, no reproach on you this day, may God forgive you, and he's the most merciful of those who show mercy. No reproach. Wow, that's interesting. And in the footnote, it says, narrated by Abu Hurairah, I heard God's messenger saying, verily God created mercy. The day he created it, he made it into 100 parts. He withheld with him 99 parts. Wow. And sent its one part to all his creatures. Had a disbeliever known of all the mercy which is in the hands of God, he would not have lost hope of entering paradise. And had a believer known of all the punishment which is present with God, he would not have considered himself safe from the hellfire. This is from Sahih al-Bukhari 86469. Oh, that makes me incredibly emotional. So I suppose you could see in the footnote 99 parts. I think human beings are sufficiently compassionate, empathetic, and sympathetic. I think we are. Sometimes even more than we require, because I'm more of a justice-loving man. But imagine that 99% of that mercy that God created is left with God, and God is saying that if only the disbeliever knew how much mercy I have for him, he would not consider entering into heaven an impossible ordeal. He would have considered it a possibility. That's baffling to me. And that's baffling to me that God is saying this in the Quran. This is in the footnote. It's incredible. It makes me emotional. It makes me emotional because we tend to forget. We hold ourselves sometimes to lenient record, sometimes to a very harsh record. But we must understand that we are not the judge of our life. There is a greater judge, and that judge is so infinitely merciful. So infinitely merciful. That's why in all religions, we are encouraged to beg for forgiveness and to be grateful. Forgiveness and grace, forgiveness and graciousness. It's because of this. It's because God is ready to forgive, and when God forgives you, you can forgive yourself. It's so interesting. This makes me emotional. And lest we shall continue. Go with this shirt of mine and cast it over the face of my father. He will become clear-sighted. Oh, I didn't know that. And bring me all your family. Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that was done. And when the caravan departed, their father said, I do indeed feel the smell of Joseph. If only you think me not a dotard, a person who has weakness of mind because of old age, demented, or somebody retarded, or somebody who's insane. So imagine Joseph has sent his shirt, put it on our father, and he will see. And the father smells the shirt coming. It's so beautiful. They said, by God, certainly you are in your old era. Well, Wow, their egos really must have been hurt. Why would they say that? Then when the bearer of glad tidings arrived, he cast it, the shirt over his face, and he became clear-sighted. He said, "Did I not say to you, I know from God that which you know not?" Of course you do. You are Jacob. You're Israel. Of course you do. It's so funny that he is a prophet of incredible magnitude, but his sons consider him an old man. It's so interesting to me. In Urdu, we have a saying, "Ghar ki murgi dal barabar." I don't know if we have an English counterpart. It simply means what is yours is devalued. So if you have a Mercedes, it's not as special as the other person's Mercedes. It just feels like it's a car. But if somebody else has a Mercedes, you're like, wow, you have a Mercedes. I wonder if we have an English comparative. They said, "Oh, our Father, ask forgiveness from God for our sins. Indeed, we have been sinners." Well, yes. He said, "I will ask my Lord for forgiveness for you. Verily, He, only He, is the oft forgiving, the most merciful." I think this chapter is heavy on forgiveness and gratefulness. I think all this chapter is teaching the people of Mecca and the people of today is to forgive. A lot has been done to Joseph, and yet he's forgiven all of them, and to his father he's forgiving, and God is forgiving and merciful. I think these terms. I think the central theme of this chapter is forgiveness. Then when they came in before Joseph, he took his parents to himself and said, "Enter Egypt if God wills, in security." And he raised his parents to the throne, and they fell down before him prostrate. And he said, "Oh, my father, this is the interpretation of my dream aforetime. My Lord has made it come true. He was indeed good to me when he took me out of the prison and brought you all here out of the Bedouin life, after Satan had sown enmity between me and my brothers." This is a beautiful thing. "Certainly my Lord is the most courteous and kind unto whom he wills. Truly he, only he, is the all-knowing, the all-wise. My Lord, you've indeed bestowed on me the sovereignty and taught me something of the interpretation of dreams. The only creator of the heavens and the earth, you are my wali." Wali is protector, helper, supporter, guardian, God, Lord, friend. For example, a woman's wali is her father or caretaker, guardian, as it also says. So in Islam, before she gets married, you have to seek permission and signature from the wali. "In this world and in the hereafter, cause me to die as a Muslim, the one submitting to your will, and join me with the righteous." That is interesting, because the Bible would certainly take issue with this translation, I understand, as a Muslim. But in the Arabic translation, it certainly says, "Tawaffani Musliman walhaqni bis-salihin." It certainly says that. So in the Quran, it is our belief that one who submits his will to God is the Muslim, and he believes in God and Muhammad as his messenger. So that is our belief, and it is long before Muhammad's time. But to explain it to the people of Mecca and to the people today, that is the way it is being framed. So it's not right or wrong, it's simply how it's being framed. So I understand if the Bible takes umbrage with this perspective. I understand that. But for Muslims, this is how it is framed. Cause me to die as a Muslim, which means cause me to die as one submitting to God's will. That's what it means. So if someone were to get deep into pedantics and semantics about, oh, well, there was no Muslim at the time. No, there are different perspectives here. What it means here is one who submits to the will of God. "That is of the news of the ghaib, the unseen, which we reveal to you, O Muhammad." Now it's back to Muhammad. I love it. I love how it's tied together. How Joseph's last verse referring to him is, "Let me die as a Muslim," and then we're back to the man who brought the religion of Islam to Muhammad. "That is of the news of the ghaib, unseen, which we reveal to you, O Muhammad. You were not present with them when they arranged their plan together, and while they were plotting, and most of mankind will not believe, even if you desire it eagerly." and no reward you ask of them, O Muhammad, those who deny your prophethood for it. The Quran, is no less than a reminder and advice unto the Alameen, the men and the jinn. And how many a sign in the heavens and the earth they pass by while they are averse therefrom. And most of them believe not in God except that they attribute partners unto him, the mushrikun, the polytheists. Now that's common practice, particularly in this time and the times before. Do they then feel secure from the coming against them of the covering veil, of the torment of God, or of the coming against them of the final hour, all of a sudden while they perceive not? See, that's what worries me about the final hour. In these books, we have been given indications of what is going to happen. But most people know not, and something will happen, and the final hour is upon them, and then all their life is a calamity. Try to think back 3 years ago, the COVID-19 pandemic. Try not to forget it. Try to remember how the whole world came to a standstill. Standstill. Everything stopped. And that was a virus that we had created in a lab and spread across the world. It wasn't something that came from the heavens or from the earth. It was something that we were tinkering with, and it brought the whole world to its knees. And then when the final hour comes, the calamity does not come from us, it comes from God and from everything. We don't know how to deal with that. Try to keep that in mind. Say, O Muhammad, this is my way. I invite you unto God, to the oneness of Islam. God in Islam. With sure knowledge, I and whosoever follows me also must invite others to God, the oneness of God, Islam, with sure knowledge. And glorified and exalted be God, above all that they associate as partners with him. And I am not of the mushrikun, the polytheist pagans, idolaters, and the ones who disbelieve in the oneness of God, those who worship others along with God, or hold up rivals or equals to him. That's mushrikun. Those are the mushrikun, that's a mushrik. And we sent not before you as messengers any but men unto whom we revealed from among the people of the townships. Have they not traveled in the land and seen what was the end of those who were before them? Yes, they have. They know, yet they deny. Even today is the same. And verily the home of the hereafter is the best for those who fear God and obey him by abstaining from sins and evil deeds and performing good and righteous deeds. Do you not then understand? They were reprieved until when the messengers gave up hope and thought that they were denied by their people. Then came to them our help, and whomsoever we willed we were rescued. And our punishment cannot be warded off from the people who are mujrimun, the criminals, the sinners, the disbelievers. Now this is God wrapping up the chapter. Indeed, in the stories, there is a lesson for men of understanding. The Quran, is not a forward statement, but a confirmation of God's existing books which were before it, the Torah, the Gospel, and other scriptures of God, and a detailed explanation of everything and a guide of a mercy for the people who believe. And that is the end of the story of Joseph. It's a fantastically told story, I must say, and it does talk about forgiveness, it talks about belief, it talks about understanding, it talks about wisdom, and I truly, truly appreciate that. Somebody's writing on my Facebook. Milad, I'll call you back. Milad's writing on my Facebook. Let me finish this. I'll call you back, Milad. The last few verses of the book of Genesis in the Bible go as such. And his brethren also went and fell down before his face, and they said, Behold, we be thy servants. And Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for am I in the place of God? Now, but as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. So in the time where Joseph lived, he could have easily disposed of his brothers without batting an eyelash. But he forgave them. Now, therefore, fear ye not. I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spake kindly unto them. Spoke. And Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's house. And Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were brought up upon Joseph's knees. He was an old man who lived long. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I die, and God will surely visit you, and bring you out of this land unto the land which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from hence. So Joseph died being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. And that is the end of the book of Genesis. And as you see, the story of Moses, Exodus, starts right after. So it's lovely how so many, 15 chapters or so, have been dedicated. 15? Maybe more than 15 chapters. No, 12 chapters have been dedicated, or maybe more, to the story of Joseph in the Bible. It's a fantastic story. I'm glad I was able to cover it because he's an incredibly central figure. But you see, with Moses, the message we end up receiving is that of righteousness, of holding steadfast with the truth, and believing in God. So taking your staff and turning it into a giant snake or a dragon, or taking your staff and putting it into the Red Sea and parting it, and putting his hand in his pocket and revealing light, or witnessing God at the holy tree, at the burning bush. So Moses is all about trusting in the miracles of God. And Jesus, we haven't really discussed in great detail yet, but Jesus sends a different message. And Noah is all about a purpose, a duty, a task, a meaning to your life, and to saying, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do, then I must do it. But Joseph is all about belief in forgiveness and mercy. This whole chapter was about mercy. And I'm thoroughly, thoroughly impressed. So in Islam, we believe that Muhammad, peace be upon him, our messenger, has all these different attributes. So he takes trust in miracles from Moses. He takes, I don't know how to quantify what Jesus represents because Jesus is so big, but eventually I'll be able to. You take purpose and meaning from Noah. You take mercy and forgiveness from Joseph. You take other things from other prophets, and they're all in him. And these are messages that Muhammad embodied, but B, also taught to all of us. So we have to trust in God's miracles, and we have to have a larger purpose in life, and we have to be merciful and forgiving. So it's a great way this book is everything. It has the answers to every problem of man. And so does this one for those who believe in it. So do the other ones. I have to tell you, this is the unvarnished, undeniable truth. I seek all my answers in the Quran. And they're always there. They're always there. Because the book is a trigger for something in me. Because the source is the same. The one that wrote the book is the one that wrote my genetic code. So I would certainly encourage everyone to read the Holy Scriptures. But thank you so much for joining me, and have a wonderful Friday, a wonderful weekend, and I shall see you